Welcome to the Bros of Gardening. I'm Mike Westphal, your host, and I'm joined by, of course, Daniel Van Dyke, my co-host. How you doing today?
I'm doing all right, bud. Yeah, we're in the thick of it now. We've hit spring for sure, and so just trying to catch our breath a little bit. But it's an exciting time. We got a lot of cool projects going on, and the stores have so much stuff in right now. It's just you walk around and it's ever changing, and new products coming in like crazy. So it's a fun time to be in the gardening world for sure. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, man. Spring is here. It is sprung. How you doing, Alex?
Oh, I'm great. I don't have nearly as much as work as you guys have, but I'm doing great.
You got to edit everything.
Yeah,
you got so
absolutely.
much going on. So, yeah, I mean, we're really, really busy around the garden center. I mean, it's just super, super jam-packed right now. There's so many plans, as you mentioned, and the customers are going crazy. So that's great. I mean, it's been so much fun, and this is the time that I love the most, I think, of any year is just when we're so busy, and it's just like just trying to keep up with everything. It's just been crazy.
Well, I think for us, we're gearing up to do a lot of the color changes and stuff. We have some bigger properties and some commercial properties where we do, it could be 1,500, annual color and stuff. So we're always chomping at the bit to do it, but we wait for the right time, obviously availability and stuff like that. So we're finally hitting that time frame where we can start to look at that and schedule that kind of stuff. And that's kind of always my barometer for like, okay, now spring is here. You know what I mean? Because it's been here for a little bit, but now we're really getting into the thick of it, which again, it's a good problem to have. We're excited, and it's a fun time for sure.
Yeah, we're right around that frost date, so this is when the gardeners are really like out and about. I mean, we just taled about it in the last
Take the
podcast.
training wheels off.
Yep. So people are getting excited about their vegetable gardens, and we're starting to get some tropicals in, like the hibiscus and mandevilla and all of that stuff. So it's definitely a really fun time around the garden
Crazy
center.
last weekend, just also because we had finally some good weather.
I know. It's been awesome.
So, all right, guys.
Cool.
Well, today's podcast is about pests in the garden and the most common diseases and pests that we can find. So, just off the top of your head, what do you find the most people asking about and trying to get rid of?
Yeah, I think it's important to identify what it is. I mean, so there's tons of disease and pest issues that you're going to run into in your garden. And I think it's important not to, be like, oh, I'm never planting this again, or I'm never doing this again. You're going to experience problems, it's just part of nature. And one thing leads to another. And we'll talk about a little bit more as we go along. But definitely, I think my best advice to people is walk around the yard.
Yep.
Enjoy what the fruits of your labor, and then be involved with your plants. Be looking at them, inspect them a little bit from time to time, because there's nothing worse than finding a big problem way down the road.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, my favorite line is be preventative rather than curative. So I'd rather be helping you prevent stuff rather than trying to cure it.
Right.
Now we're going to run into that. You're going to have to cure some things. But I think that's the thing is, people are always going to have insect and disease issues. So identify it, bring it to us. We'll help you identify it. Take it to your local garden center. They'll definitely help you identify it and then attack that problem. So, and don't be worried. I mean, that's why there's a garden pharmacy in our location, and that's why garden centers really exist. I mean, it's probably, we always put it in the back of the garden center because it's like the milk in the supermarket. You're gonna have to find it because you're gonna have a problem at some point, and you're gonna want a solution. And that's what we're here to do, is provide you with solutions.
Yeah, no, I think like Mike said, you want to be as preventative as possible. And so again, looking at it kind of from the landscape perspective, we guarantee everything we plant. That's what our retail store does as well. But the way we kind of work is anything that we plant, we guarantee. And so we come out and replace it if you ever have any issues with it. So what we always encourage people to do, like Mike was alluding to, is just walk around the garden, take it all in. If you do notice something in distress, even if it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal, you can snap a picture of it, send it to one of our designers if you're working with the landscape, or bring in a picture or bring in a cutting or a clipping, something that's showing kind of maybe that discoloring or some of that stuff, and try to get ahead of it. Don't wait until 15 of them have that and they're all, on their last leg, and then try to do something about it. And hopefully it's nothing. Hopefully it's just, hey, we're coming out of winter. It might be some winter burn. It might be, there can be a number of different things. But if it's early on, when possible, which isn't always the easiest thing to do, admittedly, but if you could, the earlier you catch it, the earlier you can get ahead of it. Again, like you said, preventatively, one thing I got from you was using a triple action, which I know that's one that will, even if just they've had problems in the past, if they have if using something that might be a little bit more susceptible to certain things. We'll encourage them to use that. I mean, I'll let you go on a little bit more about what triple action is, but that's just something that you can do to kind of help prevent, hopefully, some of these diseases, funguses, whatever the case may be, which is why I love triple action so much.
Yeah, I mean, triple action is a great one. That's my preventative go-to. So I'll use it in the spring season. You can use it, multiple times if you want to, but I'll typically just get out early in the season, whether it's mid-March to mid-April, somewhere in that time frame, and just spray it around the yard, just kind of spraying on top of shrubs, and mulch areas, just because it's a 3-in-1. So it's an insecticide, miticide, and a fungicide. So while I always tell people, that's great, it does all three. When something does all three, it doesn't do one of them really, really well. Yeah. So if you've got a major insect problem, I'm going to give you something that's more specific to that problem, an insecticide. But a triple action is a great product. It's made by Fertilome. You can probably find it pretty much at any local garden center. But if not, you definitely can find it here. But triple action is an awesome one that you definitely is a great thing that you can kind of just spray around your yard. A lot of people that do that have gotten on my kind of program of doing that will always be like, it looks like I'm feeding my plants, because in the spring they just look, well, it's because any small issue that you might have had is now kind of squashed.
Right.
So you don't have to worry about it. And while it's not going to be a one and done and you're done for, the whole season and you're not going to have any insect or disease issues, it just really helps. And I think it goes a long way. So, get out there and prevent some diseases with triple action.
Absolutely.
Sure. Well, what kind of pests do you think are like the most common in gardens?
I know one that we're running into a ton. Crepe myrtles, one of the most popular plants. Everybody's heard of crepe myrtles, and a lot of people have them. They have them in their yard. They see them all over the city. I mean, they're popular. Like in our area, you see the crepe myrtles all over the place, and that's for a reason. I mean, crepe myrtles are a very hardy, a very quick growing, so a lot of builders like them. I mean, there's a plethora of reasons of why people use them, but we have run into crepe myrtle bark scale. So that's one that we've seen a lot of.
Look this up.
And again, I think I've said this a few times now, but I came to Mike and said, all right, what is the best way to kind of, attack or try to do that? And so I think the first thing would be trying to find the signs of what crepe myrtle bark scale looks like. Yep. It's pretty obvious. You'll see that the bark will literally turn almost black, and you'll start to see that. You'll see the white specks, which, the scale and stuff like that. And then even the leaves will get kind of that black coating. And then what you'll also see, which is what was one of the surprising things to me, is everything underneath it will start to have kind of that black coloring too. And they're not crepe myrtles, but, the droppings off the tree and everything else. Yep. And so, what we attacked it with, and I'll let Mike go into detail about it, is we use like a systemic insect drench, and then we combine that with a dormant oil to be really aggressive with it, try to attack it from two ends. Like I said, Mike can go into more of it than I can, but that's one that we run into a lot in the landscape world, just because there are so many crepe myrtles. We're going into people's yards. A lot of times the people don't even know what it is, but we'll notice it as we walk around and say, hey, you want to start doing something about that, and try to encourage them to start attacking it that way. But I know for us personally, that's one we get a ton of. Yeah,
I mean, it's very hard to identify early on because these scale are tiny little insects. They're like a little white pencil mark on the tree, and they reproduce very quickly. They're very hard to kill because sometimes they get into the nooks and the crannies, and so you don't really know if you got them all. So I have seen people out there trying to wash them off their tree, which isn't a horrible, attempt.
Right.
It's just because they're so tiny, they can get in there and they reproduce quickly, and then the problem's right back again. So definitely kind of the life cycle of it, or not the life cycle of it, but the problem compounds itself. The crepe myrtle bark scale is feeding off the plant, so it's harming the plant. But really what happens is the scales, this is where it gets a little gross, their excrement it's what they call a honeydew, which sounds, like it's not as bad.
Yeah.
So, but this honeydew is a sweet kind of sappy kind of substance. So that drops out of them, gets on the tree, drops on the plants below, and then sooty mold gets on there. And sooty mold is a fungus. So now you've got, not only do you have an insect issue, but now you've got a sooty mold problem. And sooty mold is what you're going to really probably notice. So you're going to have crepe myrtle bark scale for a while, and then the sooty mold compounds, and then all of a sudden you start to see it because your trunks will turn this black color.
Okay. I was wondering.
So that's when you typically find it, and by the time you find it, it's really, really, it's really progressed. But it's not It's definitely not uncurable. We can cure it. It's very easy. You mentioned it. The systemic insect drench is the best. It lasts for 8 to 12 months, so you can almost get a whole year out of it. So that's going to kill the insects from the inside out, basically. So they're going to chew on the plant. The insecticide will be in the tree. So when they chew on the plant, the insect dies. Then you got to go after the sooty mold, like you mentioned, with the dormant oil. And it also is a suffocant. So the way oils work in general, not to get real detailed, is they coat the plant and they suffocate. Whether it's a fungus or an insect, it's got to breathe. So that oil coats the plant and therefore chokes out the sooty mold and whatever scale there might be left over. So that's how you really kind of attack the problem. It's a twofold process. It typically is with almost anything. We're going after, multiple things to try and really attack the problem, but it's easy to cure. It's something you got to kind of, stay on top of. It's usually a year and you're pretty much out of the woods. And then it's just a little bit of that preventative, like we talked about, just kind of making sure that it doesn't come back because it is prevalent. And we're going to, I don't know that I want to go down this road necessarily, but whenever we plant things en masse.
Sure. That's what I was literally about to say. There's never just one crepe myrtle. There's never just one crepe myrtle. So that's what we've also noticed is it might be much more prevalent on one in the backyard, but if there's one in the front yard, there's one in the side yard, there's one in your neighbor's yard, and everywhere. Chances are if you can really see it already on one, they're probably already on the other one. So that's why I'll always recommend if you're going to treat one because it looks really bad, preventatively go ahead and just treat them all. And then that maybe you don't get it as badly where it gets discolored and things like that. So I was just, you don't realize how many of something there are until you start looking around for them, from that point of view. And so that's what I've noticed again with crepe myrtles, especially in newer neighborhoods, because again, they grow quickly, they're drought tolerant, they're tough as nails, so people love to plant them for all of those reasons. So then when you do find this disease, it reminds me of like the rosette back with knockouts and stuff like that. This disease kind of just runs rampant through these neighborhoods. I mean, we have a neighborhood that we treat. There's 64 houses in the neighborhood, and we treat the crepe myrtles at every single house for this because it got on one and they didn't notice it, and it spread like wildfire, and they have over 100 crepe myrtles throughout the neighborhood. So that's just, again, something that we recommend. And then like Mike, we've talked about before, cleaning up the droppings and cleaning up that stuff as much as possible. But yeah, that's what we've noticed the most of is it spreads very quickly. So if you have multiple ones, even if you can't see it on all of them, I'd go ahead and just treat them.
Yeah. And I think, the mass plantings of things also kind of leads to a slightly different idea, which I kind of want to squash a little bit, which is, people have been saying, or I've heard, or maybe it was my interpretation of it originally was mass planting certain types of plants, meaning like, a city or a region gets really excited about a certain type of plant, like red tip photinias. So red tip photinias were planted everywhere as a hedge plant. Really pretty plant.
Beautiful.
I mean, bright red new growth, white flowers. I mean, really easy to grow. Large plant can,
privacy.
But not because we planted so many, it's just it unfortunately got a black spot fungus. And so when that fungus occurred, it got on all of them. And so now we don't even recommend planting them because it's going to get it in this area. So it's not saying, because we planted so many, that's why it got the disease. It's because there were so many, it was very recognizable.
And it was much more prevalent. And that's the same thing. Like I would still tell people crepe myrtles are still very disease resistant. All the things that we've said about crepe myrtles for years still hold true. It's just, okay, now we do have this one thing that you may have to deal with.
And it's easy to manage.
And it is. And if you know what to look for and you know the signs like we just talked about, again, you can be somewhat preventative if you start to see it. But also on top of that, it's just, it doesn't make the plant, like Mike said, it doesn't detract from the value of the plant and the good qualities of the plant. It just means there's something you have to deal with. And a lot of times people were recommending crepe myrtles because of all the issues that some of the other trees have. So it's not like there's another bulletproof tree to go to.
Yeah, nothing's perfect.
It's just, you got to kind of learn what you have to deal with.
Yeah, and I think like the red tip, sometimes you'll find things that you aren't going to plant anymore. So red tip photinias, because it's so prevalent and because it's airborne and we're in a windy area and pretty much everybody's going to experience wind in the spring, which is when the disease is out and about. And so they're just going to get it. So we're not going to recommend it. Not that it's a bad plant. It's just the maintenance on it is much higher.
Right.
Crepe myrtles don't fall into that.
No.
I don't even think knockout roses would. So
No, not at all.
a lot of these plants that might have some of these problems, we figured out the solution. So sometimes it's, again, be preventative and try and prevent it from ever happening. It'll save you down the road.
Yep.
But if it happens, we've got cures for it. So we're still going to recommend the plants because they're pretty and they're great uses.
They're popular for a reason. That's what I always tell people. They're popular for a reason.
Yep.
So.
Well, we kind of talked about small pests, but when we were talking earlier, people usually think small, but actually,
so that's something we run into a lot with landscape is pests, are in the eye of the beholder. Pests obviously have a negative connotation to them, but at the same time, deer, rabbits, while they may be cute, they can be destructive and they can be detrimental to the landscape. And so, again, if you're we've talked about selection and stuff like that, plant selection in some of the past podcasts, but I think that's where it really comes down to. If you have this problem, in our area, the peninsula has tons of deer. Where both Mike and myself live, we deal with deer every day.
Yep.
And so that's something that you kind of embrace. You can combat it with plant choices, but there are other things you can do. There are repellents, and there are systemic repellents.
Yep,
there
love
are
those.
foliar repellents and stuff you can spray. Again, rabbits will do different things, higher off the ground and stuff like that, or more the deer issue. But even, eating like liriope, which we always tell people, that's like a bulletproof, you can plant it anywhere, tough as nails.
Right.
The one thing we've noticed, rabbits don't mind eating liriope. So, and they're low to the ground. And so, again, you have different pests that come in all different forms. And again, I think it's be conscientious of it with your plant choice. But on top of that, there are things you can do to be preventative. And then there's one that I know Mike has literally taught a class on that we deal with a lot is moles and voles, which we won't get in too much of the weeds on that one. But that's one where when we come back to how we prep the soil, one of the more effective things we've found is the soil perfector. And so if somebody says, I've got really bad moles and voles in the yard, and we know that going in, and so that's, again, as we talked about, walk your garden, notice these things ahead of time. So then when you are planting and prepping for it, you can take certain precautions. So, soil perfector is essentially, it's just an additive to the soil that you mix in the backfill around the root ball. It has just tiny rocks and stuff like that. They're kind of jagged little rocks that you mix in, and so as they tunnel up towards the plants to eat those root systems, they start to run into those rocks, and that has been certainly for us one of the most effective and long-term solutions. It doesn't necessarily get them out of your yard, but it's going to protect the actual your landscaping plants and stuff like that, because a lot of times when we would come in and something would be dead and they'd be like, I have no idea what happens. You reach down, you pull on the plant, and there's just no root system left, and they got eaten by moles and voles. And they go after some of the things, like we talked about Nandina on one of the podcasts, but that's like one of the only things that can really, mess with Nandina. So that's just something that we've come across. And like I said, Mike can expand upon it a lot more than I can. But
moles and voles are a big problem, and I think it probably demands its own podcast.
Absolutely.
So I think we were talking about it. If it came up in this conversation, that we'd say a little bit of a cliffhanger and check back, because I think we need to do a whole podcast on it. I'll give you a real quick, short and sweet on it.
Cool.
Moles, start with an M, meat eater. Voles, start with a V, vegetarian. So the moles are eating the insects in the ground. The voles don't like to dig as much, so they're coming into their tunnels, going off into your flower beds and eating your plants. I think the voles are the worst because they can devour your landscape, and all of a sudden all your plants are dead, and that's where your investment went into. But moles are a nuisance in the lawn, and when you're mowing the grass, there's nothing worse than trying to mow over these tunnels and chopping up your lawn. So what we always recommend is going after the mole's food source, because that's where the problem starts, which is typically Japanese beetle grubs, which is another pest that you don't want in your yard. So milky spore will get rid of that. And then we use a repellent to get them out of your yard. So you use those two things in conjunction with each other, then you're going to be pretty confident that the problem will go away. Now, the topic goes much deeper than that, trust me. Because then we can start talking about the tunnels and the tunnel systems and the life cycles and all of the different things. But really, it's important to kind of know moles are there to eat the earthworms, the grubs, and the ground insects, and grubs are like 10 earthworms. So they're there for the grubs primarily. So if you have a Japanese beetle problem, you're going to have a mole problem. If you got a mole problem, you're going to have a vole problem. It's a vicious cycle. But really working with the milky spore and the Repellex, and then you're right, if you're just there to protect your plants, which landscape is, then Permatil is awesome.
Yeah.
Soil Perfector, Permatil, it's basically the same.
Yeah.
But it's a great product that protects that heart of that root system. I mean, I'd tell my story. I think I've actually told it maybe on this podcast. I planted a Fatsia I had in a pot for years. I love that plant. Put it in the ground. Next day, dead as a doornail. Root system completely devoured. So, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to learn from our mistakes in the garden. But that's definitely a big one. Moles and voles is a tough one.
Yeah, I think the only other thing, like I said, we've talked about this before, would be from a preventative standpoint. Again, just we're hitting spring like now, like we've talked about. One of the things we've talked about on one of the prior podcasts is cleaning up your leaf litter coming out. Like hydrangeas is a big one. All these things that defoliate. Again, they're not necessarily detrimental to the plant. They're not going to kill your plant. But if you want to rake those leaves, get that leaf litter out. You don't want all that stuff to kind of compound and build up. So just clean out the leaves. Don't build the mulch. Like if you have tried to insulate those plants, pull that mulch back a little bit. You don't want to retain too much moisture on top of that root ball and all that. So just kind of cleaning up and getting ready for spring, getting ready for that heat, and doing what you can. I mean, other than that, that's really from a landscape standpoint, just doing your kind of spring cleanup just in general. Hey, I recommend doing it aesthetically, but also functionally, that just kind of helps with some of that long-term stuff.
Yeah, I think, he hit the nail on the head. I mean, funguses are a big problem, and typically one part of curing the problem is raking up all that leaf litter and getting it out of there. I think it's important to know that, maybe not composting diseased stuff is a good idea too, because you might want to just put that in the dumpster or put it in a leaf collection bag. But putting it in your compost pile could cause problems down the road. I really recommend that if you're spraying things like herbicides on your lawn, and then you take your leaf clippings and put it into the compost pile. Sometimes you get away because most compost piles heat up to such a degree that you don't typically have to worry about some of those things, but be careful with those things. And then, certainly for us to try and identify or give solutions to every insect disease issue on a podcast would be very, very difficult. So that's why I go back to, be preventative, not curative, inspect your yard, somewhat systematically, is it every 2 to 3 weeks, but enjoy your garden and enjoy your yard. And when you do that, you'll notice some of these problems and issues that you see popping up. And then, talk to your local garden center and they'll help you attack them because, I could talk about what product specifically I'd use for mealybug or what product I'd use for thrips or what product I'd use for lacebug. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But the cool thing is there's solutions for all of them. And there's traditional solutions and there's organic solutions. If you've got houseplants and you've got issues in your houseplants, we can help you solve those. From down to the little white flies or the fungus gnats that you might have floating around your soil or mealybug. I mean, there's so many different things that we can kind of attack and control. We can do it safely with organic products. We can do it the traditional way too. And sometimes you might have to do a combination of both. But the best thing that I can tell people is there's a solution. We'll figure it out. Very, very rarely are we like, sorry, the plant's not going to make it. You got to get rid of it. That is very, very rare. So that's the good news is almost every plant is somewhat savable. We're going to help you through it. And don't worry, just trust in your local garden centers and go to them for their solutions.
Yep.
Well, thanks everybody for listening to our Bros of Gardening podcast. Next week, we're going to be talking about the gardener's toolkit. So that'll be a fun one to kind of talk about what's your favorite tools, what's my favorite tools, and what we use kind of, consistently in our jobs and in the yard. All right. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.